I call this the chasm of empathy. There are people who are playing on one side of a canyon, and then there are people who are making the game on the other side of the canyon. And there's this giant communication gap. They can almost see each other across on the other side, but when you can't get close and there's no way to cross over that chasm, it creates a sense of like lack of humanity. We don't see the other person on the other side of the screen. So it's hard to imagine who might be making this game and why the decisions are being made.
Welcome to this episode of the Community Lounge, the podcast where I chat with community managers from the video games industry who tell me their story, talk about the challenges they face, and share tips to help other community managers do their job better. I'm your host, Steve McLeod. Now, before I begin today's episode, I want to tell you quickly about the guides we are creating for community managers. Some of these guides are already finished and we've been getting great feedback about them. Topics we've covered so far include your first week as a community manager, what actually matters, burnout, recognizing it, dealing with it and preventing it, and becoming a community manager, real life stories. You'll find all of our guides and past episodes at featureupvote.com/thecommunitylounge. You'll find that link in the description. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Okay, on with the show. Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Faye V with really bad continuity. In part 1 of our conversation, we covered how Faye's background as a circus performer and her degree in psychology both influence her work in community management. It's very interesting, and I highly recommend listening to part 1 if you haven't done so yet. However, maybe this episode will stand alone. We'll find out. We ran out of time during that interview to talk about all the things we wanted to cover, so here we are today with part 2. Welcome back, Faye.
Thank you so much for having me back. I had such a fun time on our first episode that we immediately scheduled the second one. So,
despite it requiring, because of time zones, it requires you to be up and bubbly early, right?
Well, the sun's out. Might as well. Well, as much as the sun is ever out in the Pacific Northwest. So it's nice. It's a nice drizzly day. So yeah, why not? Right? Let's get going.
So, the original plan, well, kind of the idea I had is that we'd splice these 2 recordings together to make one really long episode. Mm-hmm. My producer talked me out of it. He thought it would be better as 2 separate interviews, which is good because we've both ruined the continuity. You went and got yourself a haircut, and the fringe seems to have changed, and I shaved.
Well, we tried. We did our best, right? We're wearing the same shirts, but yeah, there are some differences. This is what happens when you're telecommuting. You don't have a full production crew to keep you in line, as it were, right?
So, listeners, if this bothers you, my full apologies. I have a feeling you couldn't care less about continuity. You just want to hear the continuing wisdom of Faye that we started with in the last episode, and we'll continue today. So, Faye, there were 4 things that we had pre-discussed that we didn't get to cover last time, and let's see how we go today. We already agreed that we're going to start off with your opinion on the case for open development in the video games industry, but maybe even broader, you suggested. So let me make a case for why development should be more open.
So I think let's start with games, right? I have spent a lot of time playing and working on MMOs, which famously, I think MMO players are some of the most dedicated, but also the most particular about what they want in a game. And that makes sense when you think about the sheer investment of their time and money that MMO players will put into an MMO. We're talking about people, I think there are people who have been playing WoW for like 20 years now, right? And they're still with the same guilds. They're still with the same, characters. They're playing on the same servers with the same people that they were playing as 20 years ago. And that's absolutely amazing. But when you've put 20 years of time into something, that's like paying rent. You live there now. So to a certain extent, I think about MMOs not just as like a game that we're asking people to play, but also a home, kind of almost at like an apartment building. We're saying like, come move into this, right? Like spend your time and your money and make friends here and invest in the story and the world and the character and the clothes and there's all these jokes about like what's really end game in MMOs. I play Final Fantasy 14 a lot right now, so the right glamour and housing, right? Like making your house look nice and making sure you've got good clothes. But when people put that time and effort into something, there's a certain extent that I think that they want to know how it's being developed, just so that they feel like their time and their money and their social connections are being respected, right? I think of the ways when MMOs get shut down, how devastating that can be to the community that plays them, and just how hard that can hit those social connections, those friendships, those relationships, right? You're playing a single player RPG, there's absolutely a community around it. You go and find it on Discord, you can find it on Reddit. Before Discord and Reddit, you could find it on bulletin board systems or IRC. Just dating myself significantly there. But when the connections are formed in the game, when the platform goes away, it's hard to rebuild those.
Yeah.
So
if not impossible.
If not impossible, right? If somebody is logged off 2 years ago and then the game goes away, you may not be able to find them again. And that can be really heartbreaking, knowing, like, even if they never logged back on, as long as the platform is still there, the game is still there, there's a chance. Do you know what I mean? So when I think about open development, especially from building an MMO from the ground up in this day and age, which can be really, really hard, I think of that as respect. Do you know what I mean? I think of that as saying, like, here is what we're doing. Here is how we're building this, and here is how we are setting the foundation for you to have a game for a long time. Now, obviously, no games can last forever. That's just how technology works, unfortunately. But I think when you are building an MMO, you're building for longevity, and the promise for longevity should be there. To be clear, when I say open development, I don't mean like telling everybody what the story is immediately. Obviously, there are ways to show what you're working on that don't involve spoiling everything. People still want to discover the story for the first time. But when I was working on Ghost at Fantastic Pixel Castle, one of the things that we did was we showed a lot of our world building, even if we didn't show the story. And we spent a lot of time talking about what to show and what to keep, so that there was still that sense of discovery and that sense of excitement as people got into the game to discover the story. But one of the things, again, when you're building a world for people to live in, you almost want the world to feel really familiar, so that they have, like, they feel like they already live there before the story starts, right? Like, you're not asking a newborn to play an MMO. You're asking somebody with context to go have this adventure and become this hero. So we spent a lot of time showing how we built our different biomes. We spent a lot of time putting out there different character, like, archetypes we were thinking of having. We showed off our very first class, actually. We had a big kind of push marketing beat around that to show how we built this class, not just to say, like, oh, this is our very first class, because, I'm an MMO. Doesn't get to do that very often. So that was really fun. But it also showed how we're thinking about building classes. We wanted to make it really clear what kind of game we were making and what the experience was going to be like, so that people could take a look at us ahead of time and say, like, yes, I want to follow this along, or no, maybe this game isn't for me. And that second part sounds very scary, I think, especially to investors or business people who are really wanting to, kind of get their return on investment in a game like an MMO, which is very expensive to develop and takes a lot of time. But the response I'd have to that is, not everybody is going to play every game. That's just the nature of games. And with 1,000 games coming out every single day, it's, you just have to accept, like, this game is not going to be for everybody. That's okay. I think there are certainly people in the world who have tried WoW and bounced off of it, or who have never played WoW, and that's still the most successful MMO of all time.
I don't understand those people, but yeah, they exist.
Well, I think as the generations move on, but yes, certainly, I think of a certain caliber of the Gen X, millennial, like maybe early Gen Z, everybody who loves MMOs has touched WoW at some point, which obviously that's like the North Star of success, but there are so many levels of success underneath that. The other thing about open development that I really love is the way that it just builds investment and humanizes development. So at some point, we as an industry, I feel, stepped away from transparent communication. And what that means now is that there are a lot of people who work on games who don't have the same connection that maybe a generation and a half ago used to have. Because it used to be that game development companies were pretty small and you would just go get in the forums with your players and you'd ask some questions. The bulletin board system days, forum days, like those are, in a lot of ways I miss those days. But and this happens when industries get bigger and products get bigger and budgets explode and things like that. But there's that sense of like intimacy of development that gets lost. But what that creates is, I call this the kind of the gulf of empathy, or the chasm of empathy. So that there are people who are kind of playing on one side of a canyon, and then there are people who are making the game on the other side of the canyon. And there's this giant communication gap between them. And they can almost see each other across on the other side. But when you can't get close and there's no way to cross over that chasm, it creates a sense of like lack of humanity. We don't see the other person on the other side of the screen. So it's hard to imagine who might be making this game and why the decisions are being made. And with open development, go ahead.
On that metaphor of the chasm, the canyon, I have this idea of like a really rickety swing bridge that's better than nothing, even that is a way in which people can start to approach each other. But this is a metaphor that doesn't make any sense. But if you don't do it well, then maybe people plummet to their death, not literally. Is it hard? So what I'm suggesting is it's probably hard to do well, what you're suggesting.
Yeah, it is. It is hard to do well, because I think what's happened, and I think a lot of people who work, especially in our job in this industry, can speak to this, like almost immediate distrust, right? We get out there, we try to tell players what we're doing, and there's this like, oh, I don't know. And you feel like there are all these almost conspiracy theories that get built up about why decisions get made in games. And the reason for that is because there is an absolute lack of foundational information as to how a game gets made. So fundamentally, if you're like looking to build trust between players and developers, you need to humanize development. You need to show like, these are the people who are making your game. This is why they make the decisions they make. And if we've done our job right, what happens is, even if we make a decision they don't like, which has to happen, right? That will happen at some point. We can't make everybody happy. And at some point, something has to happen. Technology changes. There needs to be a graphics update. I don't know. You can't bring a voice actor back for the same character. So that person needs to change, even though the first person might have been super beloved, right? All of these things happen in a live service game. At some point, if you've been really transparent and straightforward about why you're making the decisions you're making, when you make that decision that people aren't happy with, they at least like believe you when you tell them why you did it, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's about respect, and it's about respecting the people who are putting the money and time into the live service experience. It's also about respecting the people who are putting all of their time into making that happen. This is a way of crediting them. It's also a way of letting them speak for their own decisions and their own expertise. I think open development is really powerful in that way.
In practical terms, so you're talking about something like a devlog, or a series of YouTube videos, or whatever, TikTok, Instagram?
I think it is going to be different from studio to studio and game to game, depending on what you're making. But I also think that if you're going to do open development, you're really committing to that. And so there are people who prefer to read blogs. There are people who prefer to watch YouTube videos. There are people who prefer to scroll through like tons of 30-second videos, 1-minute videos on TikTok, because that's just the way that they want to process information. And so I think if you're doing it, having a sort of a multi-channel approach to make sure that people are able to get the information that they want in the method that they want is the way to do it. You can't approach it a little bit and then decide, oh, that didn't work, and stop, right? You have to, I believe in the way that makes this most successful is to say, okay, we're really going to show people a lot of behind the scenes. We know the game is going to be ugly. There's gray boxes. There's a lot of blockout art. There's stuff that's not going to be there. And our best way to explain why that's there and what we're doing and why we've chosen to develop in the order that we develop is to have a couple blog posts. We're going to do an AMA on Reddit. We're going to have a live stream where we show, developer gameplay on Twitch. We're going to do a Q&A with some, content creators that we've brought into early development, let them ask questions as well, because often especially these days, content creators, streamers, they're very much like the voices of the people in that way. And so like getting them in early, having them, walking them through the feedback process, that also helps to make it feel like, so often what we're doing with play testing, we're bringing in our friends and family, and it's a group of 20 people, and that's who's testing our game for for like 5 years, right? This kind of helps keep play testing from turning into like a clique or a secret society. And there are so many people who are excited about wanting to play test a game early who have never had the opportunity to do that. So if you are building that rapport with the players with open development, even if they're not able to come play test, they still have that opportunity to take a look at what you're doing and say, oh, here's what I think, or why, or ask their questions. Why did you choose to develop in this way? Which allows for that, again, they're able to give their thoughts. They're able to give their opinions. I want to be clear. Open development's a lot of work. It sounds like it.
That's what I was thinking. It's like, as you were talking, like, how often are we going to do that? These blog posts, these influencer AMAs, that's because you basically need a dedicated community person to do all of this.
You do. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that a studio can do early on. So often our position is brought in, oh, we want to finally do our beta test. Oh, we're working towards launch. And at that point, if you're getting ready to launch, if you're in your 6 months to launch and you're hiring your community manager, I think that's too late.
Yeah.
I think, but that is sort of the standard right now. But what that means is that you don't have somebody who's as immersed in the game, in the studio, in the message of what you're building for the entertainment experience that you're building, who is comfortable serving as that bridge across the chasm of empathy. And so that's how you get that rickety bridge, which maybe sways in the wind. That's when people fall off. And it's you're sort of, in my opinion, you're not always setting the game up for success. So you're hiring a community lead very early. You're working with them constantly on what the conversation approach is. And more than that, your community lead should feel really comfortable. And this is what I'm about to say might be a little bit spicy, but your community lead should feel comfortable helping to prep the rest of developers to go talk to the players rather than them being the only point of contact. Because I think that rickety bridge problem that you were describing before is exactly the problem we face in our industry, where there is one very bottlenecked, somewhat fragile points of communication, and it's very easy to burn that person out. And then you don't
You've,
have a bridge.
you've answered two questions that I've asked other people through this series of podcasts. One is, what do you do when you're a community manager on a game that hasn't been released yet? And you've just answered that brilliantly. And the second part is about how you can introduce the whole team. And again, this is a great answer, and why you would do that. So I like that very much. Hey, let's move on to, it's quite related. So let's move on to why you think community management is worth the investment from a business case. You've just given a really good explanation of what a community manager can do before release. But in general, what's the business case for a community manager?
So I think the community manager is, I've joked about the concept of the personality cannon before, right? Where you like turn and you fire, and that's where you need hype, attention, or care, right? It's not just, you're not just bringing in a cheerleader, you're also bringing in sort of a combination of like a cheerleader, kindergarten teacher, therapist. So I think it, especially if you have a live service game, I think it's absolutely wild that there are live service games out there that don't invest not just in a community manager, but in a community team, because these are the people who are that bridge over that chasm of empathy, right? They're building the infrastructure to allow for connection between the community that uses your product, in this case games, but I think lots of products could benefit from this, and the people who are making the product. And without that bridge and without that infrastructure and without that being really strong and really stable, you don't have, functionally, you don't have a community that's going to invest in your product, in my opinion. When consumers don't feel heard, when gamers don't feel heard, they are far less likely to stick with a game. One of my favorite stories, I grew up playing a game, there are a lot of MMOs, do you know what I mean? But like, there are some that I've played, oh my gosh. And one of the games that I grew up playing with my dad, there was a guy in the forums who every single time a new expansion or a patch was released, he would go in and he would write this long list of complaints of things that he didn't like, and the game is going downhill, and I hate this, that, and the other thing. But he would never leave. Like, he would always say, "Oh, this is my last expansion," but it never was. And I think part of that was because at that time, the developers from that studio were really good about getting in the forums and answering this guy and saying, "Yeah, oh, you know what? That's a really good point that you said that," or we appreciate the feedback, but here's why we went in this direction, right? Because, part of feedback is not, you don't always take every single suggestion that every person makes. That's just the way that has to go. But they were so good about explaining why or why not that I think there was this sense of like, oh, I am actually giving feedback to people who care, and they are taking that and incorporating that into the development. They are here for me. They're building a game that, even if I don't agree with all of the decisions, they're listening to me, and they're listening to everybody else too.
I think I would find that guy very tiring, but I also find him very helpful, because he's forcing your community team to explain the stuff, and that is really useful in the bigger picture. You can then do more content saying, this is something we've changed and this is why, and he's helped you learn that. I wonder, like, he's kind of helpful and tiring, like I said, at the same time.
Yes.
Sorry, I've been running software companies for so long, and I know the type of person who have a lot of opinions, and it's really difficult to have to explain. Like, can't they just assume that we've done this for a reason and that we've debated this inside our team? But you need to explain it.
Yeah. Well, I think, people don't leave games when they feel angry. Anger is an expression of passion, and it can be really frustrating, and it can even be really like sad and hard to be on the receiving end of anger. And I want to be clear that like I'm not discounting the way that developers are impacted by like a game launching or an expansion or a patch shipping into negative reception. But I think that negative reception can be tempered if you spend that time building up the humanity of the developers, that you are able to, you know, help to set like an expectation of how feedback is delivered or language is delivered. And the other thing is that I think overall, if you're building up that connection anyway, you're less likely to ship a product that is not popular because you know what it is you're building and who you're building for. So, you know, I love the rickety bridge metaphor that you made because I think like one community manager or not having one and like having people who have other jobs at the studio kind of also be that communications person that's that rickety bridge. And not only is it's almost like the bridge doesn't exist in some ways, because if you come to a giant canyon and there's one like rickety ancient rope bridge just sort of swinging across it, do you trust that bridge is going to get you across? No. And so the way that you build trust is by having that strong communication from the ground up, from the get-go, before that chasm becomes super wide and dangerous and scary. And so people can come to that and say, oh, well, this is a really scary chasm. But that is a very well-supported bridge. That's strong infrastructure. And I feel good about walking across it. Do you know what I mean? I love the metaphor. I love the metaphor because I just keep coming back to that. So the business case, I think, in a way, especially if you really want to know what it is, like why your product is or is not landing, why your game is or is not landing with the people that you're making it for, I think you hire a community person immediately, in my opinion.
And get them to build a really solid bridge.
Yes.
On that,
yes.
That is a really nice segue into my next question. Faye, what tips do you have for first-time community managers, apart from building solid bridges?
Oh my gosh. So I think, you know, again, I joke about the personality canon, and there's a lot of joking about personality hires right now. But when your job is so dependent on your personality and all those soft social skills, we call it we call it soft skills, we call it personality. What we're actually saying is high emotional intelligence, right? Extremely high emotional intelligence. And I think that we are starting as like a society to recognize the amount of work that it takes to manage the emotional atmosphere of large communities online. You know, as our world gets smaller and game communities get larger, I think about playing like Lord of the Rings online or EverQuest or you know, Asheron's Call. Again, dating myself. And those MMOs were big, are big. Lord of the Rings Online is still going. But they were nowhere near as big as, say, you know, the 12 million people that play WoW or the 9 million that play Final Fantasy 14. And I think of the community teams that are dedicated to those games. And I'm like, yes, of course, you have multiple teams, right? Because you are managing a global game. Taking in that kind of emotional information, processing it, and turning it into actionable data, you know, with surveys, with feedback, with play testing, whatever it is that they're doing, that is a ton of emotional work. It is so much. And I think the piece of advice, and I'm sure you've heard this before, we've all said it before, but the piece of advice is have really, really strong boundaries for yourself. And
Okay.
and I'm going to say something that maybe doesn't get said before, but even and especially in the good moments, so much of our job is like chasing the high of a launch or chasing the high of a new release or a big event that's happening. Or if you work in esports, you've got, regionals and then internationals, world championships. We're always chasing those big adrenaline drops. And after almost every single one, there's that giant crash, right? So having a really strong foundation of like, yes, things are going really well, and I'm still going to log off at the right time and go outside and see people in the real world and go to bed at a normal time. Even when things are amazing and you want to be online with your community and you want to be there for like all of their discoveries, setting that boundary there sets such a like strong foundation for when things are not positive, for being able to pull back and see the bigger picture. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like staying true to your own self, regardless of whether things are going incredibly well or incredibly poorly.
It's really good advice. We've talked a lot on this podcast and previous episodes about burnout and recognizing it and dealing with it and even avoiding it. But we didn't ever, I don't think we ever touched on that aspect that even the good times, you need to be very careful. I think this is wonderful.
Yeah.
I go to a lot of events and they exhaust me. And I've learned eventually that when I'm done with my meetings for the day, I might go for one drink for dinner, and then I go to my hotel room and I just like play a game on my iPad for a couple of hours and go to sleep early, because I've learned it's the only way I can keep the energy going and even function when I get back home with my family. So I think what I'm saying is I've recognized myself and what you're saying, and that somehow I've learned along the way to do this.
Yeah. And I think that otherwise we're creating that feeling of like, oh, high, low, high, low. And it's this massive sine wave of just like everything is amazing or everything is terrible. If in both areas you can say like everything is great and I'm going to take a break, and everything is bad and I'm also going to take a break. You create a situation where you're not just swinging between these two extremes. You're kind of it's like your nervous system has an easier time reaching homeostasis again. So you're not, feeling like ecstatic or despondent. You're like, things are good and things will maybe not be as good in the future, and that's okay. That happens. Every game, especially in live service, every game is going to release acclaimed expansions, and every game is going to release expansions that people like less. It happens. And so,
like less. That's a euphemism. You mean one that everybody hands?
It happens. It's hard. Like, especially when you have like 2 or 3 amazing in a row, the expectations become so significant that like if you want to do something different, or if you want to do something that changes, or like there's turnover, right? Maybe the person that wrote the last 2 expansions has moved on to an amazing new job at a different company. They can't write the new one. It happens. So, that's having that expectation of being really strict with yourself. And it's so hard, right? When the times are good, when you're at the event, it's like whenever I go to a convention, I'm kind of the same way, I think. And I'm seeing all my friends and everybody's doing like LobbyCon. We're hanging out in the hotel, and I'm looking at my watch, and people are like, oh, it's 11, but we're going to go hang out more. I've become very strict with myself. I'm like, I'm going to bed.
Yeah. Bed is good.
Yeah.
Hey, one final question, and that is, where do you learn how to do your job as a community manager or in the community management space better?
Oh my gosh. This is a really amazing question, because I think people want like, oh, I went to school for this, as a very easy answer. And like any job in game development, like there are obviously game design courses now, and if you're an engineer, there's quite a bit of computer science and even at this point robotics work that you can do. But I think community management is not necessarily one that you can learn in a class. It's something you learn via experience. Obviously, I do recommend, as I mentioned the last time we talked, psychology. having a psychology degree is incredibly helpful, but not everybody needs to have one, I think. Where I think community management is best learned is honestly through mentorship,
Yeah.
and not just within community management. Our job is, I often joke that, like, oh, what do you do as a community manager? It depends on the studio that I'm with, right? Sometimes I am a full suite marketing professional. Sometimes I'm very focused on community. Sometimes I'm on the trust and safety side, which could even be seen as more legal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're under digital marketing, sometimes you're under PR, sometimes you're under business development. It really depends on the studio. So having a strong mentor in multiple different parts of development is really helpful. I think I have people in production that I have, like, that I really look up to, who I go and talk to, and I ask questions about, why this decision is made or how they take in feedback. People in marketing that I really look up to, that I ask, why did you design this campaign this way? I will always point to legal, like having a mentor in the legal department is going to be really important, because when you're talking about how we collect data on people, and you're talking also about like how we manage crises, or how
Mm-hmm.
we manage, and it's funny, like this sounds like I'm suddenly the no fun squad, right? Where it's like, oh, we have to plan for crisis management, we have to plan. But the worst case scenarios on the internet can happen. And having somebody who is very aware of everything from like what IP infringement or breaking terms of service looks like, to like what maybe a more dangerous situation on the internet could or could not look like, can be really helpful for helping us, again, like regulate in terms of what is actually a big problem versus where can I step back and go, like, this feels intense, but it's not actually that big a deal. I I've really just loved being able to talk with the lawyers that I have been very privileged to work with in the past, and every single one of them also just wants to help all the time. Genuinely, I want to put that out there. Like, they are wonderful people. Um, and then, yeah, business development and production are the other two. I think business development really spans just sort of like everything in games,
Yeah.
developing the business, but understanding why a financial decision gets made, or why a delay might, why a patch might end up being like delayed or something like that. Understanding the process by which a studio is run allows us to better explain to our community why our studio is being run that way, if that makes any sense. If our job is to communicate the story of development, which I do believe it is, not just the game, but the story of the development itself and the studio, we only get to do that if we actually understand the studio and the development of the game itself.
So these mentors that you seek out, are they typically for you inside the studio or the publisher that you're currently working for?
Yeah, that's where I've always started. And I think that, I mean, I always think that's a very good place to start, right? Like, once you get integrated into a studio, your direct report, the person that your boss is, like, because presumably you have a boss. If you do not have a boss, you founded your own studio, and I can't give you advice. I've never done that. But but I think, once you're in a studio, like, talk to your boss all the time. All the
Yeah.
time. I feel like I need to give a shout out to my boss from FPC, John Spector, and our studio founder, Greg Street, because without the two of them, I still bug them every single day. FPC has been unfortunately closed for a little bit, but I am constantly asking them questions about why this happened, or what's going on with this game, or, things like that. And God bless them both. They're so happy to answer me all the time over Discord. But I think that, they're so established that they have seen so many patterns before, that even if they're not on the inside of a game, they can give really interesting insights as to like what happened there. And then beyond that, I'm gonna this might sound a little bit kind of terrifying to the introverts amongst us, but going to events and just connecting with people, you're going to make friends. You're going to make friends. Ask them who they learned from. Ask them, can you put me in touch with them? Can I ask them questions? Can you set up a call? And it might sound like a lot of time committed, and it is, but also, you know, when I think of the people that I look up to in community management, I want to also understand like where they learned and what I can learn from them, and who they learned from too. Like what experiences they had and what connections they had that got them this experience. So yeah, I don't know, just talk to people. This is the friendliest industry in a lot of ways, right? Like
You're absolutely right. Yeah. I'm amazed. I'm kind of reasonably newish in it because of the way our product developed. And I just can't believe that if I go to 2 events, at the second event, I'll run into people from the first event and they'll treat me like a long lost friend. It's wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it reminds me a little bit of like niche circles of academia, where it's sort of like, oh, you want to get a hold of this paper, literally just email the person who wrote it. They will be so happy to talk to you about their research. Game developers across every part of game development are the same way. You know, if you're like, oh my God, I really look up to this game developer, and you've worked with them, can you introduce me? The answer is almost always yes. And they're going to be so happy to talk to you. They are going to want to take you out to coffee, and they're going to want to talk to you and ask you questions about you, and you know, talk about their experiences. Everyone wants to help each other, because here's the thing. At the end of the day, we make games because we love games. Nobody gets into game development because they're like, man, I don't like games, but this is the only place I can use my skills. We're here because we like games, so we want more games that we can play, and we get excited when our friends are making cool games, even if our companies are competitors. More games is always good.
Faye, we're going to have to wrap up. We've truly used up all our time. Now, in part 1, I already asked you the question I always end with, which is what games you've been playing lately. So we won't do that again, but listeners, you can hear that at the end of part 1. I know what the games are, but go back and listen. And also you told us at the end of part 1, if people want to contact you, that LinkedIn is the best way to do it. I think we'll just copy LinkedIn, the contact information. And you're also on Blue Sky, right?
I am. I'm also on Blue Sky. Akobi, ACOBI dot bluesky.social, I think is the slug currently.
So we'll copy that contact information over. Faye, thank you so much for this, for both part 1 and for coming again on part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I have had such a wonderful time. You know, it's anytime you want to have me back, Steve, this has been great.
You'll be welcome anytime. Okay, bye, Faye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Community Lounge podcast. If you enjoyed it, please spread the word and share it with friends and colleagues who you think would also enjoy it. And to make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. And please give the show a rating or give a review, as this helps listeners find the podcast and it makes me feel good. You can find past episodes or learn more about the show at featureupvote.com/the Community Lounge. And finally, I'm going to leave you with a short ad for Feature Upvote, the player feedback platform I created and the sponsor of the show. Bye.
Your players love your game, but the community has ideas, and lots of them. The trouble is, their feedback is scattered across Discord, forums, social media, and somewhere deep within your inbox. You feel like you are drowning in feedback. That's where Feature Upvote comes in. With Feature Upvote, you can centralize all your player feedback in one place. Set up a feedback board where your community can post suggestions and vote for their favorites. The most popular ideas rise to the top, giving you a clear, data-driven roadmap. Pages are fully customizable to match your game's art style and vibe. With no logins required, no friction, just instant organized feedback from the people who care most. Stunlock Studios, the team behind V Rising, uses Feature Upvote as a centralized, organized way to collect and prioritize player feedback. With spam filtering, duplicate merging, and integrations for tools like Jira and Discord, nothing slips through the cracks. As a result, more player satisfaction and a stronger, loyal community. Get started today and get the flood of player feedback under control.